That is the mentality of the Conservatives.
Mate, I can't argue with the word you've said because that is politics. I'm not arguing, but have a listen now because I'm going to invite our paper reviewers into this conversation. And thanks for calling, mate. 0800 731 2000. That's Lenny in Ashford, who always calls us up and has some, wisdom to bring to the conversation. But Lenny has made some serious challenges or accusations, if you prefer, about the current government, and we've got a defender of the current government as one of our paper reviewers. I'm presuming anyway, because Albie Amankona is with us, co-founder of Tories for Equality. Albie, great to have you with us. Am I right in suggesting that you would defend the current government and certainly the Chancellor's tax cuts of a few days ago?
You're certainly right to say that I am a supporter of the Conservative Party, and I think that we should welcome the budget that came out on Friday with cautious optimism. There's plenty in there to like. There are some decisions which have been made which are perhaps the wrong decisions for this point in time, but overall I am supportive of the government's drive to grow the economy.
And Michael Bancoli is with us as well. He's the co-host of Politics Jam podcast. Welcome back to the programme, Michael. For those who don't remember, am I right in describing the Politics Jam podcast as a insight or a political science insight into the political conversations of the day?
That is correct. You've got a good memory.
No, not just a good memory. I do look on the site as well, What, do you think I just ignore it each time I say to you, Politics Jam? Do you think I just ignore it?
No, I'm glad you're a regular listener.
Yeah. Regular? Well, I like the Royal Mess episode, put it that way. But we won't talk about that. You've heard from Albie now. He's a supporter of the Conservative Party and certainly finds that there are some things to like about the Chancellor's budget on Friday. What say you?
I think it was a deeply irresponsible budget. I think these tax cuts are going to lead to more inequality, and inequality is not good for economic growth. And look, taking on debt to fund tax cuts for the rich during a cost of living crisis, to me, is deeply irresponsible. And it could have worrying short and long-term implications. I think what the government should have been doing is borrowing responsibly to kind of help people survive during this cost of living crisis.
0800 731 2000. So those are the positions for tonight's paper reviewers. 0800 731 2000. Would like your contributions as well, if you so choose. If not, kick back and relax and enjoy it. So we've got Michael Bancoli, co-host of Politics Jam podcast, and Albie Amankona, Albie Amankona, who's a co-founder of Tories for Equality. Bear with me, both of you. We're going to take the kid gloves off now. You've been both polite, yeah? But now, let's get on with it. 0800 731 2000. It's your mate Dotun here on BBC Radio London. If you'd like to join in the conversation, then feel free. So we go through the papers. We've got Michael Bancoli, co-host of Politics Jam podcast with us. We've got Albie Amankona, he's co-founder of Tories for Equality. So Albie, as you know, the tax cuts by the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, controversial to say the least, biggest tax cut since 1972, 50 years since this level of tax cuts. You said that there are some good things, some positive things to take from them. What are they?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in the overall mini budget that was released on Thursday, there are lots of good things that we can take on it. So I think one of the things that actually has been massively underreported on is that actually this government wants to liberalise the planning laws for onshore wind. So essentially, since David Cameron was in power, onshore wind has effectively been banned. There's been a moratorium on it because the planning laws are so hard to essentially get around. This government wants to get rid of that regulation and bring that back in line with the planning regulation for other things. So I think that's a good thing, which is in the budget. I think
the fracking, which is a similar kind of desire by the government to exploit our energy resources, is that a good thing?
Yes, I think both are a good thing. Ultimately, we need to have an energy independent strategy in the United Kingdom, and that is going to involve getting our energy from renewables, getting our energy from the North Sea, getting our energy from fracking. We just need energy sources as quickly and as cheaply as possible. Now, the cheapest way to get energy is from onshore wind, which is why they want to liberalise the planning on that. And then also for backup, we will need fossil fuels, and it's relatively cheap to get fossil fuels from the UK continental shelf, either from North Sea drilling or from fracking. So I think both of those are needed for a secure energy policy.
We'll
we don't need to rely on international markets.
And we will return to tax cuts. And the primary issue of tax cuts is the cap on the tax limits for the super rich as well. But Michael Bankole, just on that subject of energy, increasing our opportunity to exploit our energy, whether it be wind farms or fracking, you can't argue with that, can you? Or can you?
I think you can. And I think one of the worrying things about the budget is that it's lack of short-term, long-term thinking. It's very short-termist in its thinking, I think. And when you look at the ways in which we need to move forward, we need to move to a green economy. And I don't think that's been captured by this mini budget. So I think, one of the things we need to look at moving forward is how can we bring energy prices down in the long term? So short term, there should have been some income support provided to families who are struggling to cost of living prices. But long term, how about, thinking about insulating homes in a plan that means that we're less reliant on expensive gas to heat our homes. These are sorts of things I think we need to see in this budget, because climate change is a matter of life and death. We're seeing in parts of the global south the devastating effects of climate change. And I think it's important we move to a green economy as soon as possible.
But Michael, just on the support for low-income families through the cost of living crisis, I mean, are you forgetting the energy support scheme for businesses and families that the government is rolling out for, I think it's 2 years, and that's set to cost about £60 billion for 6 months, and it's going to last for 2 years. That is the support which the government is putting in place to help people through the energy crisis, and I think you very conveniently missed that out in your assessment.
Albie, when we look at where we are in Britain at the moment, so food price inflation is going to rise to 20% early next year. 10 million people are going hungry in the UK. 1/3 of us are struggling to pay our bills. The support offered in this budget was not enough for ordinary families in this country. And when we look at what was offered in this budget, this was a budget for the rich. Tax cuts for the rich are going to make this country more unequal. And inequality is not good for economic growth. In fact, there's lots of scientific evidence and academic research that suggests that the most unequal economies are also the least healthy. So I think it's important that we think about those, lower down the ladder and how we can support those. And I don't think governments have done that.
But I would argue that the energy support scheme is what the government is doing to support people on low incomes, coupled with universal credit. Now, I think we can probably have a discussion about whether or not there should have been more in the budget, specifically targeted support for low-income families, whether or not we should have seen perhaps a personal allowance increase.
Why do you think there wasn't more, Albie? Because that would have seemed like the obvious thing to do in tackling the cost of living crisis that many people have been facing for the last 6 months. And now is the optimum time, isn't it, when we're approaching winter, when those energy costs will cripple a lot of families, to be honest. Why do you think there wasn't more to tackle that in this budget?
I'm sure supporters of the government would argue that earlier on this year, the government announced a £37 billion package to help people through the cost of living crisis, and has subsequently announced an energy support scheme for businesses and families, which it could cost £200 billion over the course of 2 years. So I just want to really challenge this perception that the government is doing nothing to help people through the cost of living crisis. That is one of the biggest fiscal interventions that a British government has ever made, bigger than a lot of the COVID support schemes that were out there. So it is simply not true to say that this government is doing nothing to help people through the cost of living crisis. The budget is a growth plan. It is a plan to grow the economy. The support for people on low incomes and the support for people with their energy bills is coming from the energy support scheme.
Michael, simply not true. Would you lie to us?
No, I'm not lying to anyone here. I think the premise of this budget, right, is trickle-down economics, right? So we've seen tax cuts that will benefit
But
those.
what about the energy support scheme that was also announced this week? Do you have any comment on that?
I haven't interrupted you when you've spoken at all, Albie, so I would appreciate if I'm able to finish my point. Thank you very much. Tax cuts are going to disproportionately benefit those at the top and cripple our public services. And at a time when there's going to be huge pressure on our public services, this cost of living crisis is going to mean that lots of people are relying on public services, the NHS, which we all love and cherish in this country. Lots of people are going to be relying on the NHS this winter. So the fact that we are seeing the rich get richer and those who are already struggling, they're going to struggle even more this winter. That to me is abhorrent. It's poor economics. You know, the idea that making the rich richer, they're going to spend more and all the boats in this country are going to lift equally. That's a myth. It doesn't work like that. And again, I'll go back to my earlier point. Societies are unequal. It means that, you know, there's this inequality when it comes to income. These societies are not healthy and we don't see growth. You know, the corporation tax cut, for example, businesses do not make the decisions on where they invest based solely on low taxes. So the idea that low taxes are a guarantee of economic growth is it's absolutely bonkers. We had low corporation tax rates during the Osborne years, yet comparatively, when you look at levels of investment, productivity, and economic performance, it was lower than Germany, who had a higher level of corporation tax. So I think we need to really wake up here and not fool ourselves.
Albie?
Right. So, Michael, you clearly don't want to address any of my points about the energy support scheme, and that's absolutely fine. But that is there, and that is something which is going to be benefiting people in the near future. Now, I'll try and attack this in a different way. The budget is there to grow the economy, and the whole thinking behind the budget is that we need to grow the pie instead of just looking at how we divide up the pie and redistribute it to other people. It's about looking at the economy and the revenue that we generate from taxation in a completely different way. Now, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, what they hope to do is grow the pie by stimulating the economy. Now, we can have a debate on how we stimulate the economy. The Conservatives want to stimulate the economy by by things like the super tax deduction, making it easier for people to invest in British companies on equipment for machinery and things like that. Also on tax cuts for businesses, corporation tax. Why would you raise corporation tax during a recession? No other major economy is doing that. Why would you make it more difficult for businesses to trade and for people to keep more of their own money by increasing national insurance contributions? They're going to reverse that, something which Labour supported, by the way. And also, they want to bring forward the 1p reduction in income tax from 20% to 19%. They're bringing it forward from 2024 to 2023, allowing more people to keep more of their own money and making work pay. That would be their argument about how they want to get the economy growing.
Are there any other major economies? And I apologise for interrupting. I don't mind if you interrupt me any time, by the way. And if you don't mind, gentlemen, I'll just interject every now and then just to keep the conversation going. And feel free to interact with each other. No need to wait till the other person finishes. But I think Michael made a fair point. If he's in full flow, let him finish his point. But are there any other major economies, Albie, that are offering tax breaks, or at least the type of tax cuts that we've seen over the last 48 hours or so, that the UK is offering the wealthy and big companies? Are there any other major economies doing it right at this moment?
So the first thing I would say is that the way you frame the question isn't necessarily that helpful. So when it comes to... Well,
you made the point about no other major economies offering corporation. Okay, fair enough.
I'm going to answer the question. So no other major economy is raising taxes on businesses or on individuals at this point in time. So the two major tax cuts, the national insurance contributions reverse, is simply reversing a policy, reversing a tax rise which has already happened. And the corporation tax rise is cancelling a tax rise which is to happen. And the argument that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng have made on those points are no other major economy is raising taxes at this time. They're simply adding things to their national debt. Now, so we can debate the merits of that or the dismerits of that, if you like, but that would be my first point. Now, on the second point about the taxes for the wealthiest and the highest earners in society. So actually, what is happening with this reversal or abolishment of the higher rate of income tax is we're actually taking that tax rate down from 45% to 40%, which is actually the level of taxation for higher earners, which was in place for almost the entirety of the last Labour government, and the 45% tax rate that we have at the moment is higher than in similar economies that we see, like the US and also in Italy. So this isn't really the radical change that I think a lot of people think it is. It's more bringing things back in line with other economies that we see globally.
Michael, does he have a point there?
I don't think he does have a point. And again, your question, you alluded to the timing of this. And the timing of this is important. I think the market reaction following the budget suggests that I'm not alone in thinking this was crude timing. I think we have to look at the context here. I mentioned earlier that food price inflation is going to reach 20% early next year. You know, Albie spoken about the support the government's given, and I'm not saying the governments haven't given support. I said they hadn't given enough support for those in low incomes. And I just look at this budget and I just think we're in a cost of living crisis where people are choosing between heating and eating, right? People are making tough decisions for their families. And the government is saying we're going to cut taxes for the rich and we're going to, so Albie spoke about growing the pie.
They would argue that they're cutting taxes for the poor as well, though, wouldn't they? The government.
Yeah, but so Albie's argument is about growing the pie and how if the rich get richer, it's good for our economy because, you know, we're growing the pie in some way, right? But underscoring that idea is the idea that at some point boats are going to rise equally. That's not the case. And I'm honestly, the question for Albie is, when has that worked successfully and when has that not led to income inequality? Because people often cite the 80s, but that, you know, led to income inequality in the US under Reagan. So I think it's important that we don't kid ourselves here.
I'm not kidding myself, Michael.
The Conservatives have made a choice here. They want to batter the rich, and the Conservatives ultimately, historically, have done so and will continue to do so.
Michael, the point of growing the pie, I think you've completely misconstrued what I've said. The budget is not about the rich getting richer. The budget is about the economy growing faster, and therefore the tax take that we take from revenue generated by people's incomes and businesses' incomes gets bigger, so we can pay for the public services that we all need and pay off the debt that we have accrued over the last 25 years. That is the idea, the working idea and the working assumption that the government is going on.
But it's a gamble. It is a gamble, though, isn't it?
It was also, you could argue, a gamble just to continue on the same path that we were going down, which quite frankly, Dotun, hasn't been working for the last 25 years. We've seen pretty measly growth across the board, whether or not we had a Labour government or whether or not we had a Conservative government. So I think there are many that would argue it is probably time for some sort of change in the direction of how we are doing things in order to grow the economy more quickly, grow the revenue that we take in from taxes by that fast growing economy, and therefore having more money to spend on public services that way, instead of this continual perpetual cycle of, you know, tax and spend, but actually the tax take doesn't get any bigger because the economy is not growing fast enough.
Yeah, Michael, we needed some kind of bold intervention, did we not, from this government now, given all the money that we owe as a result of the pandemic and now the money that we're going to borrow to help people at the bottom end of the scale survive the winter. We needed some kind of radical development and, you know, you may argue against tax breaks from the rich as you describe it, and as many people are describing it as well at the moment. But if you believe or you accept that it could trickle down, it could result in stronger businesses and businesses not going to the wall, and that's a real risk now as we go forward in this cost of living crisis, not least in the leisure industry, may I say. They're facing a real uncertain future. Do you not need something bold from a government to say, we hear you, we understand the role that investment and business plays in the economy?
You speak about something we need something radical, and at this moment, the radical plan we needed was more investment, right? You know, when we think about where we are as a nation,
from where?
More investment in our public services. More investment.
From where? Are you saying that the government should be putting investment into our public services? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, and I think the government at the moment.
So you're saying that we, the taxpayer, should be putting more money into our public services. I'm sorry to keep interrupting. I just wanted to make it clear for all our listeners where this money's coming from.
I think a lot of us would be happy to fund our public services, the NHS, and all the public services we cherish as a nation. My point is more that the government are borrowing, as things stand, they are borrowing money to cut taxes for the rich. That is not a good thing in during a cost of living crisis. That money that we're borrowing could be used to put money in the pockets of those who need it the most, the people on low incomes, the people who are choosing between heating and eating. So you talk about growing the pie and making the rich richer, and that might benefit us. I'm talking about actually helping those, if you're going to borrow that money, helping those on low incomes. And yes,
Michael, part of growing the pie is growing the pie to pay for public services that help everyone, including people.
And my argument is that the best.
No, I'm sorry, but you really keep hammering home this making the rich richer point. The point of the budget is not to make the rich richer. The point of the budget is to grow the economy at 2.5%. That is the point of the budget. And the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have said they are willing to make unpopular decisions in order to do that. And clearly, these decisions have been unpopular. They are with you. And they have even been unpopular with some Conservatives that I have been speaking to. But the point, nonetheless, is to grow the economy, not to make the rich richer, to grow the economy, which benefits all of us.
It's based on a flawed premise. It's based on the flawed premise that this is all going to trickle down.
So if the economy grows, will the tax take get bigger or not? Yes or no?
Albie, I'm telling you, this budget.
To say yes or no. If the economy grows, will the tax take get bigger or smaller?
Answer the question if I want to answer the question. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, I think it will get bigger. I think that's clear to everyone.
It is bonkers, though, is it not, Albie, that this is a Conservative government we're talking about, that it borrows money to give tax breaks. You know, tax breaks is something that you give when the economy is doing so well that there's a surplus of money, not one that you go, imagine me, you know, your average Joe, more or less, mortgage payer as well, by the way. Imagine me going to borrow money from my bank to be able to pay my mortgage. That doesn't sound right. You would expect me to work and work a little bit harder if my mortgage is high to pay my mortgage. Or I wouldn't borrow money on my credit card to go and pay my mortgage, for example. That's just bonkers, isn't it?
It's quite typical in recessions for economies to cut taxes to stimulate growth in the economy. I think the problem is with this package, which is not a package I'm wholly happy with, by the way, just to make that clear, is that really what the government should be focusing on to begin with is getting inflation down. And that is what the energy support scheme will do. I think there are some predictions which say that the energy support scheme will bring inflation down by 5%. And then after that, after inflation comes down, that is, in my opinion, the time where you stimulate the economy with tax cuts and smarter, nimbler regulation.
Yeah, the Bank of England is saying, Michael, and just on that point, is saying, Michael, that, look, the last thing you want, if you want to bring inflation down, is to borrow more money and put it into the system so that people can spend more money and inflation goes up. That's what they're saying. Where do you sit on this? I think I know.
Yeah, look, I'm just to go back to the tone of this budget, I just think it just misses the point. And look, Kwasi Kwarteng is a very clever man. He's a very bright man. He's taken a calculated risk with this budget. And I think he knows that. And I think Albie's actually mentioned that himself. And look, when we look at the cuts to income and national insurance, they're going to give the richest 5%, 8,500 annually. You're going to give the average family £400. This is what I mean by this budget completely missing the tone. So when Albie interrupts me and mentions that this isn't about the rich getting richer, the numbers tell a different story.
Well, Keir Starmer tells a different story. He said you're going to be 55 grand richer, Albie. If you're a millionaire, you're going to be 55 grand richer as a result of this budget. How would you describe that other than the rich getting richer?
I would describe that as the government attempting to make the UK a more attractive place to do business and a more attractive place for high net worth individuals to settle and pay their taxes in Britain rather than paying their taxes abroad or trying to evade tax through legal means. That is the argument that the government would make. That's the argument that the Chancellor would make. I agree that the optics of bringing in this 45 to 40p tax rate down at this very point in time, it's not something that I would have liked to have seen.
It's more than
it's something which has been announced. But the point is that if it brings economic growth and it increases the tax take and it grows the pie, then I think I can deal with that discomfort.
This has been a fascinating conversation. It ain't over. It's only part one. I don't know if either of you, both of you, preferably, are available this time next Sunday, because then we can reflect on the Labour Party conference and indeed look ahead to the other conferences as well. Do you fancy coming back next week? Are you both available? Can I get you to...
Yes, I'll be here. I'll be in Birmingham at Tory conference, but I can always make time for you, Dotun.
That would be delicious, and thank you very much. And how about you, Michael? You up for it again next Sunday?
Yeah, you can always count on me.
I really am grateful to you both, genuinely. Thank you for this evening. A fascinating conversation, which I think I'll hand over to our listeners now. I know